Picture this: a temple bathed in morning light. Incense curls through the air. A monk in saffron robes leans over a newborn, barely 3 days old, swaddled in silk the color of celebration. His voice is soft, melodic, ancient. He chants a blessing that has echoed through 25 centuries. Jati pi dukkha, birth is suffering. The parents beam. Relatives clasp their hands in gratitude. The baby sleeps, oblivious, held in a circle of love and hope and desperate, aching tenderness. And yet the words hang there, stark and unshakable. Birth is suffering. This is not metaphor. It is doctrine, the first noble truth of Buddhism, spoken by the Buddha himself in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the very first sermon after his awakening. Birth, aging, illness, death, all dukkha, all marked by an inescapable unsatisfactoriness, a structural instability that no amount of comfort can finally resolve. So here's the question that cracks open everything. If life is suffering, if existence itself is shot through with dukkha, what does it mean to bring new life into the world? Is it an act of love? Or is it perhaps an act of violence? This is not a question asked only by pessimists or misanthropes. It is the central thrust of a growing philosophical movement called Antinatalism, the view that procreation is morally problematic. Even wrong, because it subjects a new person to inevitable harm without their consent. Antinatalists argue that compassion, if taken seriously, should prevent the creation of new sufferers. But Buddhism, which shares the antinatalists' sober diagnosis of suffering, arrives at a radically different prescription. It does not say, stop the wheel by ceasing to create. It says, awaken within the wheel and liberate all beings who spin. One sees birth as the problem, the other sees ignorance as the problem, and birth as the stage on which liberation is possible. So which is it? Let's be clear about what's at stake here. This is not an abstract debate. It touches the most intimate decisions we make, whether to have children, how to live with purpose, what we owe to future beings who do not yet exist. It ripples out into culture, policy, the survival or transformation of civilizations. We are going to explore this tension with intellectual honesty and narrative depth. We will begin by tracing the origins, Buddhist teachings on dukkha, and the lineage of antinatalist thought. Then we will dissect the psychological machinery beneath the surface, the evolved drives, cognitive biases, and existential strategies that animate both pronatalism and its opposite. From there, we will map these forces onto the modern battlefield: fertility collapse, climate anxiety, online movements, and the pitched conflicts over meaning and legacy in an age of crisis. And finally, we will ask, is there a way to hold both truths at once without retreating into dogma or despair? This is a journey into the most uncomfortable corner of ethics and existence. There are no easy answers here. But if we are serious about compassion, about reducing suffering, about living with eyes open, then we cannot look away. The gate of birth stands before us. Let us walk through it together. To understand how Buddhism and antinatalism intersect and where they fracture, we must first understand their foundations. Both begin with an unflinching acknowledgement of suffering. But from that shared starting point, they diverge into entirely different metaphysical and ethical landscapes. Let's start with the Buddhist frame. The first noble truth is unambiguous. Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, illness is suffering, death is suffering, union with what is displeasing is suffering, separation from what is pleasing is suffering, not to get what one wants is suffering. This is from the Samyutta Nikaya, the Buddha's first teaching after enlightenment. It is not a lament. It is a diagnosis. Dukkha is often translated as suffering, but that word is too narrow. It means unsatisfactoriness, a kind of inherent instability in conditioned existence. Even pleasure is dukkha, because it is impermanent. You grasp for it, and it slips away. You cling to what you love, and you lose it. The very structure of life is such that satisfaction cannot be held. Buddhism explains this through the doctrine of dependent origination, a 12-linked chain that shows how suffering arises. It begins with ignorance, not knowing the nature of reality. Ignorance gives rise to craving, the thirst for sensory pleasure, for becoming, for annihilation. Craving leads to clinging, to objects, identities, beliefs. Clinging fuels the process of becoming, the karmic momentum that propels consciousness into new forms. And becoming inevitably results in birth, rebirth, in the traditional cosmology, which in turn leads to aging, death, and the whole cycle beginning again. This is samsara, the wheel of birth and death, spinning endlessly through realms of existence, driven by ignorance and craving. Now, here is where it gets interesting. The Buddhist response to this diagnosis is not to simply stop being born. It is to uproot the ignorance and craving that cause rebirth. The goal is nirvana, literally extinguishing, the cessation of dukkha through the cultivation of wisdom, ethical conduct, and meditative insight. The Noble Eightfold Path is the method. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. In other words, Buddhism offers a transformative path within existence. It does not say life is bad and must be negated. It says life, as currently lived, driven by ignorance and craving, is unsatisfactory and can be awakened. There is a famous passage where the Buddha describes why he left the household life. The household life is confined and dusty. The life of one gone forth is wide open. Renunciation in Buddhism is not about hating life. It is about stepping out of the prison of compulsive desire. And crucially, while monastics take vows of celibacy, laypeople do not. The precepts for laypeople emphasize non-harm, honesty, sexual responsibility. But procreation is not categorically forbidden. In fact, in Mahayana and Vajrayana traditions, human birth is celebrated as rare and precious. There is a parable. Imagine a blind turtle swimming in a vast ocean, surfacing once every 100 years. On the surface of the ocean floats a single wooden yoke. The chance of that turtle surfacing with its head through the yoke is said to be greater than the chance of obtaining a precious human rebirth. Why precious? Because humans have the capacity for awakening. Animals are trapped in instinct. Gods are intoxicated by pleasure. Only humans have the perfect balance of suffering and intelligence to see through samsara and transcend it. So Buddhism, at its core, holds birth as both dukkha and opportunity. Now let us turn to antinatalism. The sentiment is ancient. In Sophocles' Oedipus at Colonus, the chorus sings, "Not to be born is best." Ecclesiastes echoes this. "I consider the dead more fortunate than the living, and better than both is the one who has not yet been born." There is a thread of existential despair woven through Western literature, a suspicion that existence is a burden we should not impose. But modern antinatalism sharpens this intuition into a philosophical position. Arthur Schopenhauer, the 19th century German philosopher, built his entire system on the idea that life is suffering, driven by a blind, insatiable will that can never be satisfied. He wrote, "If children were brought into the world by an act of pure reason alone, would the human race continue to exist? Would not a man rather have so much sympathy with the coming generation as to spare it the burden of existence?" Peter Wessel Zapffe, a Norwegian philosopher, took this further in his haunting essay, The Last Messiah. He argued that human consciousness is a tragic over-evolution. We are cursed with the ability to see the meaninglessness and cruelty of existence, and we survive only through desperate psychological strategies, distraction, anchoring ourselves to fragile meanings, sublimating despair into art or ideology, or simply repressing the horror. But the most rigorous contemporary case comes from David Benatar, a South African philosopher, in his book, The Asymmetry. Benatar proposes a simple logical structure. 1. The presence of pain is bad. 2. The presence of pleasure is good. 3. The absence of pain is good, even if no one is there to enjoy its absence. 4. The absence of pleasure is not bad unless someone exists and is deprived of it. From this asymmetry, Benatar concludes that bringing a person into existence always creates harm because they will experience pain. But not bringing them into existence avoids harm without creating a corresponding deprivation, because there is no one there to miss the pleasure. Therefore, it is always better not to be born. There are variations. Negative utilitarians prioritize minimizing suffering over maximizing happiness. Environmental antinatalists argue that each new human accelerates ecological collapse. Ethicists extend the logic to all sentient life, arguing that consciousness itself is the problem and should ideally be phased out of the universe. All of these positions share a core conviction that existence is, on balance, harmful, and that compassion demands we do not impose it on new beings. Now, on the surface, Buddhism and antinatalism seem to align. Both see suffering as pervasive. Both are suspicious of optimistic narratives that gloss over existential pain. Both elevate compassion and non-harm as ethical cornerstones. Both reject the naive romanticism that says life is always a gift. But look closer, and the divergence becomes clear. Buddhism does not see non-creation as the solution, because in the Buddhist worldview, there is no final ending of the stream of becoming simply by not procreating. Samsara is beginningless. Beings are already here, already cycling. Refusing to have children does not liberate anyone from the wheel. Only awakening does. Moreover, Buddhism, especially in its Mahayana form, holds up the bodhisattva ideal, the enlightened being who chooses to return to samsara again and again out of compassion for all beings. The bodhisattva does not avoid birth. They embrace it as the field of compassionate action. The Lotus Sutra uses the metaphor of a burning house. The world is on fire with suffering, and the bodhisattva runs into the house, not to add fuel, but to guide others to safety. This is the inversion that makes Buddhist ethics incompatible with thoroughgoing antinatalism. Where antinatalism says, prevent harm by preventing birth, Buddhism says, alleviate harm by transforming consciousness. One sees birth as the generator of suffering, the other sees ignorance as the generator of suffering, and birth as the crucible in which ignorance can be burned away. So we have two traditions, gazing into the same abyss, drawing opposite conclusions about what to do. The question is, which is seen more clearly? Philosophy gives us the architecture of thought, but beneath the arguments, there are mechanisms, psychological, evolutionary, existential, that drive the human impulse to reproduce, and the human impulse to question that reproduction. If we want to understand why this debate matters, and why it is so emotionally charged, we have to descend into the machinery of desire and meaning. Let's start with biology. We are, bluntly, vehicles for genes that have been ruthlessly selected for one thing: replication. Every ancestor you have successfully reproduced. That is not a moral fact. It is a statistical one. The drive to reproduce is not chosen. It is inherited, hardwired, hormonally reinforced. Oxytocin floods the brain during bonding. Dopamine fires at the prospect of legacy. Evolution does not care whether you are happy. It cares whether you pass on your code. But here is the tension. Humans also evolved the capacity for reflection. We can step back from our drives and interrogate them. We can ask, should I obey this impulse? And this is where things get messy. Cognitive biases shape our judgments about procreation in powerful, often invisible ways. Take the optimism bias. We systematically underestimate the likelihood of bad outcomes for ourselves and our children. We imagine them thriving, not suffering. We discount the risks of chronic illness, economic instability, psychological pain, existential despair. We think, my child will be different. There is the focusing illusion. We overestimate how much happiness children will bring because we focus on the Kodak moments, first steps, laughter, graduations, while underweighting the grinding daily reality of sleeplessness, conflict, and worry. Hedonic adaptation ensures that even the joy we do feel fades to baseline. Studies consistently show that parents report lower day-to-day happiness than non-parents, even as they report higher levels of meaning. Meaning is not happiness. Meaning is the story we tell ourselves to make the suffering bearable. Then there is the just world hypothesis, the belief that things generally work out, that good intentions yield good outcomes, that the universe is not fundamentally indifferent. This belief is comforting, but it is not true, and it justifies bringing new life into a world that offers no guarantees. Terror management theory suggests that children serve as an immortality project, both literal, our genes continue, and symbolic, our values, our name, our story endure. In the face of mortality, procreation is a defiant act. I will not disappear. Now let's bring Buddhist psychology into focus. In the Pali Canon, craving, tanha, comes in three forms. There is craving for sensory pleasure, kama tanha. There is craving for becoming, bhava tanha. The desire to exist, to continue, to project oneself into the future. And there is craving for non-becoming, vibhava tanha, the desire for annihilation, for escape, for the cessation of existence. Procreation is often an expression of bhava tanha. It is the impulse to continue, not just biologically but existentially. My child is an extension of me. My lineage is my bridge across the void. This is clinging to identity, to the illusion of a continuous self that persists through time. But here is the subtle Buddhist warning. Antinatalist certainty can also be a form of clinging. If you grasp at non-existence as salvation, if you make a rigid doctrine out of refusal, you may be enacting vibhava tanha, a craving for annihilation disguised as compassion. Buddhism teaches that both eternalism, the belief that the self continues forever, and annihilationism, the belief that the self is utterly extinguished at death, are wrong views. The middle way is to see through the illusion of self altogether, not to affirm it through continuation, nor to negate it through annihilation, but to recognize that it was never solid in the first place. The Buddhist concept of upadana, clinging, is crucial here. We cling to identities, parent, child, family, lineage. We invest these with ultimate significance. But from the Buddhist perspective, these are aggregates, skandhas, temporary bundles of form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness in constant flux. There is no fixed, unchanging self. To cling to parent as identity is to suffer when that role shifts or ends. To invest ultimate meaning in lineage is to build a monument on sand. And yet, here is the paradox. Parents do report higher levels of meaning, even as they report lower happiness. Meaning is what we construct to make sense of suffering. It is the narrative we impose on chaos. Buddhism does not dismiss meaning entirely. It recognizes that meaning can be skillful or unskillful. Skillful meaning reduces suffering and cultivates wisdom. Unskillful meaning perpetuates craving and delusion. So the question becomes, is the meaning derived from parenthood skillful? Does it liberate or does it bind? Let's turn to compassion. Compassion, in both Buddhist and antinatalist ethics, is central, but it points in two directions. Compassion as non-harm suggests restraint. If I know that bringing a child into existence will subject them to suffering, and I know this with certainty because suffering is structural, then perhaps the most compassionate act is not to create them. But compassion as presence suggests engagement. If beings exist or will exist regardless of my choice, then compassion means tending to them, caring for them, reducing their suffering where possible. This is the Bodhisattva logic. The world is full of suffering beings. My job is not to prevent all future births, but to liberate those who are here. The Mahayana tradition emphasizes this fiercely. The Bodhisattva does not say, "I will avoid the burning house." The Bodhisattva says, "I will return to the burning house again and again until every being is free." This creates a stark ethical divergence. Antinatalism leans toward prevention. Buddhism leans toward transformation. And then there is the consent argument, which is uniquely challenging. Antinatalists argue that procreation is morally fraught because the child cannot consent to being born. You are imposing existence, and therefore suffering, on a being who has no say in the matter. This seems intuitively powerful, but Buddhism raises a counter-question. If there is no enduring self, who exactly is the one who would consent before arising? The self is not a pre-existing entity, waiting in some metaphysical lobby, deciding whether to enter existence. Consciousness arises dependently, conditioned by causes. There is no fixed agent before birth to whom rights or consent apply. This does not dissolve the ethical problem, it shifts it. The Buddhist focus is not on hypothetical pre-persons, but on intentions, satana, and consequences, karma, that affect beings who do arise. The question becomes, what are my intentions in creating life? Are they rooted in craving, in fear, in clinging? Or are they rooted in wisdom, compassion, and a realistic assessment of my capacity to reduce suffering? Buddhist ethics is consequentialist and virtue-based, not rights-based. It asks, what will this action lead to? And what kind of person am I becoming through this action? So here is what we have learned in this descent into mechanism. We are driven by evolutionary code and shaped by cognitive distortions. We cling to identities and meanings that are ultimately unstable. We mistake craving for love and fear for wisdom. And yet, within all this, there is a sliver of clarity, the possibility of acting from intention rather than impulse, from wisdom rather than delusion. Buddhism and antinatalism both see the machinery clearly, but they propose different responses. One says, since we are caught in this machine, let us not build more machines. The other says, since we are caught in this machine, let us awaken within it and teach others to awaken. Which path is more compassionate? The answer, if there is one, depends on what you believe is possible. We have traced the historical roots and dissected the psychological machinery. Now let us look around at the world we actually inhabit in the 21st century and ask, how do these ancient and modern philosophies map onto the lived reality of birth in the age of crisis? The demographic facts are stark. Across much of the developed world, fertility rates have collapsed. South Korea's fertility rate is below 0.8, less than 1 child per woman, a demographic freefall. Japan, Italy, Spain, Germany, all below replacement. Even in the United States, where immigration has historically offset low birth rates, fertility is declining. The reasons are complex: economic precarity, housing costs, student debt, the demands of modern labor markets, the erosion of social safety nets, and a cultural shift away from the script that says family is destiny. Governments are panicking. They offer subsidies, parental leave, tax incentives. And yet, in most cases, these policies fail. Why? Because they treat fertility as a technical problem, a matter of incentives, when it is actually an existential one. People are not having children because they have looked at the world and decided, consciously or not, that bringing new life into it is too risky, too burdensome, or simply not worth it. Online, these sentiments find community. There are antinatalist forums where people share arguments and testimonials. There are child-free movements that celebrate the decision not to procreate, framing it as a choice of autonomy and environmental responsibility. There is Birth Strike, a movement of people who publicly declare they will not have children because of the climate crisis. They say, "I cannot, in good conscience, bring a child into a world that will be defined by floods, fires, mass migration, and civilizational collapse." This is environmental antinatalism, and it is growing. The logic is simple. Each new human, especially in a high-consumption society, adds to the carbon load, accelerates ecological destruction, and inherits a future of compounded suffering. To have children under these conditions is, in this view, selfish and reckless. Then there is ethilism, a more extreme position. Ethilists argue that suffering is not just a human problem, but a cosmic one. Nature is red in tooth and claw. Evolution is a blind, amoral process that produces vast quantities of suffering. Predation, starvation, disease, parasitism, on an unimaginable scale. The ethilist conclusion is that sentient life itself is a mistake, and that compassion, taken to its logical end, would seek the painless extinction of all consciousness. Some ethilists go further, worrying about risks, scenarios of astronomical suffering, such as the creation of trillions of conscious digital entities trapped in virtual hells, or the colonization of the universe by sentient beings doomed to suffer. The argument is not just that we should stop having children, it is that we should prevent the expansion of consciousness into the cosmos. This is antinatalism at its most uncompromising. It does not flinch, it does not console. But there are countercurrents. In recent years, a pronatalist movement has emerged, especially among tech elites and public intellectuals. They argue that declining fertility is an existential threat, not to the planet, but to civilization itself. They worry about stagnation, loss of innovation, economic collapse, and the erosion of human potential. Some advocate for technological solutions, embryo selection for intelligence and health, surrogacy networks, even artificial wombs.
Others frame childbearing as a civilizational duty, a way to ensure that the future is populated by people who care about progress, freedom, and flourishing. But this pronatalism is ethically fraught. When it slides into eugenic logic, selecting for desirable traits, treating children as instruments of civilizational projects, it becomes deeply troubling. And when it ignores the lived realities of economic inequality, climate risk, and systemic suffering, it begins to sound less like compassion and more like ideology.
So, how might Buddhist ethics navigate this battlefield? Buddhism does not offer a single answer, but it offers a lens. First, there is the principle of right intention. Why do you want to have children? Is it out of genuine compassion and the capacity to care? Or is it out of fear of mortality, social pressure, a need to validate your identity, or a desire to impose your vision on the future? Buddhism asks you to interrogate your motives with ruthless honesty. Second, there is right action. This is not about rules, it is about consequences. If you bring a child into the world, what conditions can you realistically provide? Can you offer not just material security, but emotional presence, education in wisdom, and a path toward reducing their dukkha? If the answer is no, if you are bringing life into conditions of neglect, violence, or overwhelming systemic suffering, then Buddhist ethics would counsel restraint. Third, there is the principle of interdependence. Suffering is not just individual, it is systemic. Buddhist compassion extends beyond personal decisions to the structures that shape life. From a Buddhist perspective, the ethical work is not just to decide whether to have children, but to transform the conditions under which all beings live. This means working to reduce poverty, violence, environmental destruction, and the causes of collective dukkha. It means policy that prioritizes not birth rates, but the welfare of beings who exist and will exist. And then there is the bodhisattva question. reframed for modernity. If many children will be born regardless of your choice, because most people do not think this way, because systems incentivize or coerce procreation, does compassion call you to steward those lives skillfully rather than simply reducing their number? Or does wisdom, in an age of ecological and existential crisis, call for radical restraint? This is not an easy question, but it is the right question. Buddhism also extends compassion beyond humans. Factory farming, in which tens of billions of sentient animals are bred into lives of pure suffering and then slaughtered, is an antinatalist nightmare made real. From a Buddhist perspective, the imperative is clear. Do not participate in creating sentient beings for exploitation. This aligns directly with antinatalist logic. The same principle applies to wild animal suffering, an area where some philosophers argue for intervention to reduce predation and starvation. Buddhism would approach this with caution, aware of the complexity and interdependence of ecosystems. But the underlying concern is the same. Suffering matters, wherever it occurs. And then there is the question of artificial intelligence. If we create conscious machines, if we give rise to synthetic minds capable of suffering, what is our responsibility? Buddhism, with its emphasis on all sentient beings, would urge extreme caution. Do not create new streams of consciousness unless you can ensure their liberation. Do not populate the universe with beings doomed to dukkha. Finally, there is the power of narrative. The stories we tell shape the choices we make. Films, novels, social media. These are not neutral. They romanticize parenthood or problematize it. They present life as a gift or as a burden. Buddhism calls these narratives skillful means or delusions, depending on whether they reduce craving and increase wisdom or perpetuate ignorance. The question is, which stories are we telling, and are they true? We live in an age of crisis, ecological, political, existential. The old scripts are breaking down. The question of whether to bring new life into this world is no longer automatic. It is contested, agonized over, moralized. And Buddhist ethics does not resolve the contest, but it clarifies the terms. It says, look at your intention, look at the conditions, look at the consequences, and act from compassion, not from craving or fear. We have walked a long path together, through doctrine and history, psychology and modernity. Now, as we approach the end, let us gather what we have learned and ask, what does it all mean? Can Buddhism and antinatalism be reconciled, or are they fundamentally opposed? The answer, as with all deep questions, is both. They align in their shared recognition that suffering is pervasive and that wishful thinking is dangerous. Both reject the naive optimism that says life is always a gift. Both center compassion as the ethical ground. Both warn against the lure of consolation stories that let us avoid hard truths. But they clash in their endgames. Antinatalism says, prevent harm by preventing birth. Buddhism says, liberate consciousness within birth. One treats existence as the problem. The other treats ignorance as the problem, and existence as the crucible in which ignorance can be overcome. One is a philosophy of prevention. The other is a philosophy of transformation. So which is right? Perhaps the question is wrong. Perhaps the task is not to choose between them, but to hold both lenses simultaneously and ask a more textured question. Given the reality of suffering, given the uncertainty of outcomes, given my intentions and capacities, what is the most compassionate action in this moment? Let me propose a framework, a middle way, if you will, that does not dissolve the tension, but makes it workable. There are two ethical axes we must hold together. The first is intention. Why do you want to have children or not? Is the motive rooted in compassion or in self-justification? Is it an expression of love or of fear? Is it a projection of your ego or a genuine willingness to serve another being's flourishing? Buddhist ethics is unsparing here. It asks you to see your own craving clearly and to act from wisdom, not from impulse. The second is capacity. What conditions can you realistically provide? Not just material resources, but presence, care, emotional intelligence, and the ability to guide a child toward wisdom and away from unnecessary suffering. If you cannot offer this, if you are bringing life into neglect, abuse, or systemic catastrophe, then restraint is the compassionate choice. And then there is consequence. What is the likely outcome? Not in some idealized fantasy, but in the actual world, with its risks and uncertainties. A realistic appraisal of climate, economy, mental health, and the child's horizon of possibility. This is not a calculus that yields a single answer. It is a practice of discernment. The middle way, in Buddhist terms, avoids two extremes, eternalism and annihilationism. Applied to procreation, this means avoiding both the romanticization of birth as inherently good, eternalism, and the condemnation of birth as inherently wrong, annihilationism. Instead, we hold birth as conditionally ethically defensible, depending on intention, capacity, and consequence. For the person who chooses renunciation, who decides not to have children, there is honor in that. Channel your love and care into adoption, mentorship, teaching, systemic activism. Reduce suffering for beings who already exist. This is a valid and deeply compassionate path. For the person who chooses parenthood, make it a vow. Not a default, but a conscious commitment. A vow to create life only under conditions where you can genuinely reduce that being's dukkha. A vow to raise them with wisdom, to teach them the path, to give them tools for liberation. Not as an extension of your ego, but as a being in their own right. And for policymakers, institutions, and societies, measure success not by birth rates, but by the reduction of suffering for all beings who exist and will exist. Invest in mental health, ecological repair, economic security, education and wisdom. Make the world a place where life is less dukkha, not more. None of this erases the tragedy at the heart of existence. Buddhism is clear-eyed about this. Life is suffering, in the sense that it is marked by impermanence, instability, and the impossibility of permanent satisfaction. But Buddhism also insists that suffering is not the final word. Liberation is possible. Awakening is possible. Compassion, wisely applied, can reduce dukkha, not eliminate it, but lessen it. So here is the lingering question I leave you with. If compassion is your compass and suffering is the terrain you navigate, what choice, today, in this moment, with your particular life and capacities, will most skillfully reduce dukkha without clinging to certainty? Will you create life with full awareness of what that means, the suffering you will bring into being, and the possibility of guiding that life toward wisdom? Or will you refrain, channeling your care into the beings who already exist, trusting that restraint is also a form of love? Or will you dedicate yourself to transforming the systems that generate suffering, so that the question of birth becomes less ethically fraught for everyone? There is no single right answer. There is only the quality of your intention, the depth of your honesty, and the skillfulness of your action. So ask yourself, what in your desire to have or not have children is craving? What is compassion and what is fear? And which of these should you trust? The gate of birth stands open. The path beyond is yours to walk.